All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I want to share some thoughts with you guys. About 2 years ago, give or take, I made a video that was called Micro Four Thirds Can Kill Full Frame If. And the whole premise of that video was if Micro Four Thirds starts adapting the technology that's in cell phones, that the computational photography can bridge the gap enough such that people would prefer to shoot on smaller, more portable, lighter equipment. And with the smaller sensor size, you can stabilize it easier, faster scan and readout speeds, all that stuff. In that time frame, maybe it was longer than 2 years ago, nothing has changed in reality. Now there is some computational stuff going on with like AI and learning, autofocus recognition, that kind of stuff. But nothing's really changed. In fact, I'm going to say this. If someone were to come to me today and ask, hey, I don't have a camera. Where should I invest my money? I got money to spend. Where should I invest it? And I ask all the usual stuff about use case and what's important and all these things. But in general, I would tell them full frame is the only way to go. Let me explain. Now, before you get all triggered, I do have a second video that I might make that's going to counteract this. But I'm going to do a lot of equivalency conversations, so if that upsets you, you can click off of this right now. I understand a lot of my user or follower base is probably Micro Four Thirds or Fuji because that's what I like to use. And I'll say that at the end, I'll kind of come around on this. But I want to make some points. And this is more of a frustration in my point of where not only Micro Four Thirds and Fuji kind of is going or has gone, but what has happened over that time frame since I made that video. I don't typically make notes. I do this off the cuff. I've got it in my head, like things I want to talk about, but I want to do some conversation around, I want to have some conversation on the different aspects that you might want to consider as to somebody who's going to go into photography and what to buy and what to purchase with all different things. And I'll start with this statement. With the OM1 release, Olympus OM1, and the Panasonic GH6 release, what they've shown me is that Micro Four Thirds is going niche, or niche, however you say the word. Now, it's not to say that Panasonic's not going to release a G9 Mark II or a G10 that's more photographic specific. But what the OM1 is to me is a fantastic overall camera that doesn't beat other offerings in a lot of ways, except for weather sealing and long wildlife action type of stuff. The GH6, similarly, awesome camera, but doesn't really, there's no compelling reason to go with that camera unless you're into shooting video, anamorphic, high production value video. Outside of that, you should go full frame. And I'll talk about a couple different things here. First of all, let's go with equivalency and portability. Now, one of the big things in Micro Four Thirds is depth of field and sensor noise performance. That's what a lot of people get stuck on. Now, some don't, some do. And what I've found is with Sigma's releases and Sony's releases and their lenses lately, and even some of the Canon stuff, like here, for example, I have this 16mm f2.8. I have the 51.8. That they've kind of taken away the excuse that Micro Four Thirds is more portable in a smaller package. And frankly, Micro Four Thirds has done it to themselves. Let's talk about a couple different areas where Micro Four Thirds typically was known to be small. Now, the sweet spot for Micro Four Thirds, in my opinion, was the small primes, the 12 f2, this is Olympus, 25-1.8 or 25-1.4 Panasonic Leica, 45 or 42.5, 1.7, 1.8, those types of lenses, like tiny little primes with high image output that can be put in your pocket. And I would say there's still an argument for that. However, if you start looking at the equivalent focal lengths in full frame now, those lenses aren't alone in their size and portability. What comes to mind is the Sony 50mm 2.5G, the Sony 24mm f2.8G. Sigma makes some f2 primes, their contemporary line, that are very, very small. And so, you know, if you're going to look at those, why not put it on a bigger sensor? get more depth of field. And let's talk about equivalency, for example. The 50mm f2.5 G lens that Sony makes, to get the same depth of field and focal length, focal angle equivalency, you'd have to shoot a 25mm 1.2. I have the 25 1.2 lens for Olympus. It's big. It's 2 to 3 times the size of that Sony lens, and it's 2 to 3 times the cost of that Sony lens and the 25mm. Let's talk portraiture. You want shallow depth of field. You can shoot 45 1.8. That's a small one, like I mentioned, but really you want to be at the Nocticron 42.5 1.2, the 45 1.2. You're talking 90mm equivalent focal length, 2.4 depth of field. Why not get an 85 1.8? Heck, Canon makes an 85 f2. Now, I'm being a little naive. If you made it this far in the video and clicked off, I would say the optics in those two Pro lenses would smoke the 85 f2 Canon lens. I don't know for sure. That's probably true. But Panasonic Lumix makes an 85 1.8. That's a very good, cheap lens. Sony makes 85 1.8s that are very good lenses. And again, they're a third the cost and about half the weight. Let's go the 24mm route. The 12 f2 is a great lens. Let's say you want to get some real good separation though. Get the 12 1.4. That's a beast. It's a big, expensive $900 heavy lens. You can shoot 24mm f2.8 and get the same type of look and output. Now, I would argue the Leica lens is probably a little better, but not substantially. The sensor makes up for some of the differences and other things. Now, some of you are probably saying, yeah, Eric, but like depth of field and it's not all, it's not correct. You got to talk about aperture and letting light into the sensor. I agree. But the sensor also makes up for that gap. Let me give you an example. If you're going to shoot the 25mm f1.2 lens on Olympus versus the 50mm f2.5 lens on Sony, and go for a third the cost and go for a third of the weight, you're giving up, what, 2.5 stops? Something in there of exposure? Well, I would say even with the OM1 and older Micro Four Thirds cameras and compared to current full frame cameras, you're still getting about a 2-stop difference in noise performance. So what's the advantage there? What about body size? When's the last time Olympus made something compelling, professionally compelling, in a small form factor that wasn't matched by its rivals? The OM1 by itself is not much smaller than this Canon R6. It's not much smaller than a Nikon Z6. It's not much smaller than a lot of these bodies. A7C certainly. Now it's take the OM1 over the A7C all day, but certainly it's not a size thing there. Where is the replacement for where Micro Four Thirds shines? The Pen F Mark II. What have they released lately? The EM10 Mark IV? It's a budget entry-level camera that's using old parts. It doesn't have the specs to be a professional camera. And that's kind of my point. Micro Four Thirds is kind of falling its way into specialty extra long wildlife, specialty video, or entry-level small compact stuff, which is getting gobbled up by smartphones. Tony Northrup made a video yesterday at the time of the release of this about smartphones being real cameras, and I don't really love Tony Northrup, but he's got a good point there. He's got a great point. And so they're not really developing the bodies that keep true to Micro Four Thirds. I can say the same thing about Fuji. It's kind of in no man's land all over the place, right? The X-T4 has gotten bigger. They're going to release this XH2, which is going to be bigger as well. It's going to be specialized in supposedly one video, and one's going to be high megapixel count. But even Fuji's doing something similar. They've lost their way a little bit. The X-T4 incorporated kind of XH1 stuff with the flip screen and the IBIS. The X-T3 I'm shooting on, I prefer that screen for photography. Where's that camera? The XS10, what is that? I'm not saying they're bad cameras. It's just Fuji's kind of blending things up right now. What are they doing? Back to the lens equivalency thing real quick. If we say you're shooting sports or even wildlife, up to 400 millimeters, The lens options you can go for that are pro grade is the 50 to 200 Leica on Panasonic, 40 to 150 Micro Four Thirds. Now I'm going to say the pro lenses because of this exact reason. Those are f2.8 constant or f2.8 to f4 type lenses. That means it's an f5.6 to f8 depth of field equivalency. And I've already talked to you about the two stops of light, how that's compensated with sensor differences, in the most part. So I'm not going to consider the 40 to 150 plastic lens, because I think that still holds true to Micro Four Thirds strengths. But if you look at what Canon, because I just have a Canon in my hands, they have a 100 to 400 that's what, f5.6 to f8. It matches that. And it's cheaper. It's half the cost, $800. And it's not a bad lens. Go watch some reviews on it. The thing is sharp. It's very good. You put that on an R6 and R5 body, you have some awesome autofocus. It does a great job. Now, I don't know if it's got the same level of weather sealing, but it's not a slouch. And of course, then you still have the options of going the bigger and heavier pro lenses like the 24 to 70 f2.8, 70 to 200 f2.8, all those lenses. But even then, have you seen the new 70 to 200 f4? That's a very compact, small lens, relatively small lens for full frame. Now, it's not the same size as Micro Four Thirds. I'm not trying to say that. Nikon's got a 24 to 120 f4. That's basically a 12 to what, 60? What's that, the Leica 2.8 to f4? The Nikon lens probably beats it between the sensor size and the constant f4 aperture for $1,000. Then there's the last piece of this, the body costs. The Canon R6 is $2,400. So is an OM1 and so is a GH6. So if you want the latest and greatest technology, I'm talking about latest. Now there is an R5, which is more money than this. And there's an R3, right? They keep going, but for same body cost, an R6 or a Z6 Mark II or a Sony A7 Mark IV versus an OM1. And last but not least, the camera market's being crushed. It has been being crushed. We've got inflation, we've got supply chain concerns. I think there's going to be monetary issues in the future. These camera manufacturers are going to be forced to carve out these niches or grab market share. And I think the Micro Four Thirds manufacturers are realizing this. Let's grab our niche and stick with it. I think it's pretty clear Olympus is going to focus on wildlife and durability and the ruggedness. And I'm pretty sure Panasonic's going to focus on the GH6 line as their main Micro Four Thirds focus for video. If they make a G10 or G9 Mark II, it's because the parts are already there. They just got to change the body shape a little bit. It's going to be a battle between Nikon, Canon, and Sony. And right now, it's really Canon and Sony moving forward. And in saying that, the leaders in the market will always be where the money resides, the revenue, where there's actual competition occurring. And the last piece of that is the R&D dollars in bulk are going to be going to those full frame offerings. Medium format in Fuji is amazing, but it's not a replacement for full frame at all. Yes, the tonality is different, the output's different, it is awesome, but that's not going to replace where the money's spent in photography for wedding photography or for high-end video. It's just not there. It's a very specialty niche, portraiture lens or landscape, portraiture camera or portraiture or a landscape camera. So if someone were to ask me today, I would tell them to look into full frame, honestly. And if size and weight's a concern, there's a lot of options out there for you. Tamron, Sigma, Sony native mount, now some Canon native mount. Heck, even Nikon's got some smaller stuff now, right? What, the 40mm f2 and 28 f2.8 or whatever those lenses were that they made? Those are small too. And Micro Four Thirds, and I think even Fuji has a tough battle on their hands. You've listened to me talk for a long time on this, and if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for that, first of all. The equivalency conversation pisses people off. Dogging on sensor size pisses people off. Pisses people like me off. But I want to make the point to counteract that video I made 2 years ago and say two things. I have an X-T3 sitting in front of me recording me right now. I have an R6 sitting next to me. The R6 beats this X-T3 in so many different ways. It's got a flip screen to see myself for video. I have no clue if I'm in focus right now. It has way better eye autofocus and tracking. It has IBIS and it has a bigger sensor. And ergonomically, from a grips perspective, it's probably better. The R6 is the better camera. I still like picking the X-T3 up, just like I like picking up my EM1 Mark II and EM1 Mark III cameras when I had the Olympus stuff. At the end, it's just a tool. And if you can make great images with it and you enjoy it and it fits into your budget, that's really all that matters. So I hope I cover off on everything I just said by saying that. And I'll say one other thing. The market is missing a major, major opportunity. I made that video 2 years ago. My thought was, if I worked for these camera companies, my R&D dollars would be spent on trying to replicate what a cell phone can do and why it's so popular in cameras. I'll give you an example. They put cameras in smartphones, and smartphones have become the main camera for most people. And it's so many, first of all, it's size and portability. That's the number one thing, right? 2, you can share instantly. 3, you can back up to the cloud instantly. 4, you can edit on the fly. And 5, the optics are getting better with computational photography or lenses and computational photography. Why aren't camera manufacturers doing that? Why aren't they allowing you to edit on the phone, on the camera? Yes, the Zeiss ZX1 did it, but that's like a weird spaceship camera. Why aren't they allowing wireless connectivity to your cell phone for instant cloud backup into Lightroom? Why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they allowing you to do computational photography like an iPhone's doing for night photography or for simulated depth of field, and do it right? And do it right, Olympus. You want to overcome that conversation? Give me the 1.8 or 1.2 light gathering on those tiny lenses and let me get rid of why I have a full frame sensor. That's the other thing too. I mean, the tonality and stuff that comes from a bigger sensor is definitely important. So that's something else that I think about. But I guess my point is this. The camera market's shrinking. Cell phones have a lot to do with that. And if you're not in like a super niche, like pocket size need, or if you're not shooting super long telephoto wildlife, like the 150 to 400 Olympus lens, like amazing, unmatched. Or you're shooting specialty video, which I think of all three of those, Panasonic is the shortest on that because full frame can do all that stuff in the video side. The GH6, I think, is a limited, its life is limited in where it fits, it carves itself out in the world. And then these camera manufacturers need to start putting they need to get real serious about it. Give somebody a reason to carry a camera around that's not their cell phone. Leverage the bigger sensor size and the interchangeable lenses and the optics and put some of that technology in it. You'll set yourself apart. And frankly, if that's going to happen, because of R&D dollars, I think it's going to come from one of the main 3 manufacturers. That's my belief. Unless Olympus or OM Systems gets real smart and says that's where we're going to put our money moving forward, I think it's going to come from one of those 3. Anyways, guys, I just wanted to share that with you. I still haven't decided between the R6 and the X-T3. $2,400, $1,000, all the advantages of this, the conversation I just had with you guys. The X-T3, I don't know, whatever. Different video for a different time. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Catch you next time. Peace.